Welcome to the Unitarian Universalists of New Braunfels Sunday virtual service. We light our chalice this morning with the words of Leslie Poe Kasbah. Flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home. Today, we are honored to hear from Jack McKinney. Jack was born in Washington, D.C. to a pair of displaced Texans, although he spent most of his formative years in Nacogdoches, Texas. He eventually returned to D.C. to finish his schooling at the Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia, and then moved back to Houston for degrees in English and Business Management at Rice University. He moved to New Braunfels 20 years ago and operates a foundation construction company here. He enjoyed reading from an early age. His father traveled often and usually brought home Kurt Vonnegut paperbacks. His childhood was also marked by the first moon landing and the heyday of Godzilla films. He began writing in high school and on and off through college. Political science was also an interest of his, and through chance, he was able to land a regular spot, a column in the Herald-Zeitung. His early themes in the Herald-Zeitung had to do with politics. More recently, though, he veered into popular culture, and his early interest in science fiction has crept back into his writings. Whatever the topic, though, he has been lucky enough to find what he believes to be a pure human truth expressed somehow through politics, science, religion, or rock and roll that has application for everyday life. Today, he is going to talk to us about dancing between what and what if.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for having me. Diane, are we working correctly here? Thank you. Well, good morning. They used to say that the ability to use tools was what separated man from the lower animals. However, chimpanzees have been observed shaping sticks in order to harvest termites for consumption. And rooks have been seen flicking rocks at snails and to break their shells and eat them as well. So we need another yardstick for civilization. And today, I'm going to offer up the idea of language as a new defining metric. More specifically, given that most invertebrates communicate with each other in one form or another, I will present the idea of language refined to a degree capable of expressing abstract thought. I believe that the communication of abstract ideas, both religious and scientific, is where civilization really started. So at the risk of oversimplifying things, we can start with two phrases, what and what if, and see how they're used. What is a question asking what we know about something. What if asks us what it is that we don't know. What asks for a definition which serves to identify, but at the same time limit our understanding of the subject. What if takes us further and allows us to explore the possibilities for new definitions. As an example, this is a coffee cup. It is not a wine glass. It is not a Chevrolet 350 engine bored 30 thousandths over with new rod bearings. That's it. We've defined it. It will never be anything other than a coffee cup. So that's just a simple example of what I'm talking about here. And you can see this progression very clearly in the Bible. At the risk of oversimplifying things again, the Old Testament was written in some very primitive languages, Aramaic and Classical Hebrew being the chief examples. And these languages weren't developed enough to where abstract ideas could be communicated very well. A good example of this would be Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, where Moses, seeking to understand the nature of God, is told simply, I am who I am. And that's about as far as you can go down the abstract path with language like that. And I'll add that talking to anybody who's standing inside of a fiery whirlwind is not an environment conducive to follow-up questions. When we get to the New Testament, the language of the day was Attic Greek. Comparing Attic Greek to ancient Aramaic is like comparing a Rolls Royce to a lame mule in terms of how you can express ideas with it. The idea of the Trinity, for example, with the mysterious Holy Ghost sneaking around somewhere, could not be expressed in the older languages. The Old Testament God of wrath was superseded by the New Testament God of love. The Old Testament God was a God of action. The New Testament God was a God of idea. The old guy would send a plague of locusts on you as part of a bet with the devil. The new guy would make you a glass of wine out of some water. The difference between the two was communicated so starkly that there were early Christian sects who believed that the Bible was talking about two different gods. And if you're interested in exploring that, I can refer you to a book by Bart Ehrman called Lost Christianities. And while this was going on, a schism was developing. Religious leaders used language to promote the position of the church in everyday life, while a group of miscreants, whom we now refer to as scientists, were using language to promote ideas which were frequently seen as contradictory to church doctrine. And ironically, a lot of those early thinkers, Ptolemy and Aristotle foremost, initially set out to study the heavens, which was God's traditional domain. Copernicus and Galileo were actually tried by the Inquisition and forced to recant their beliefs. During the Dark Ages, you could actually get burned at the stake for having some crazy idea about the world being round. And I'll note that confessing to heresy is an easy thing to do while someone is piling firewood up around you. And through the centuries, the antagonism between religion and science would continue. An age of enlightenment would be followed by a great awakening, and so on. And almost 100 years ago in this country, we might have seen our last great religious statement in the form of Tennessee versus Scopes, otherwise known as the monkey trial. And a teacher in Dayton, Tennessee, had the nerve to teach a harebrained theory of evolution to his students. John Scopes was convicted. The conviction was overturned on a technicality. And I felt like the most damning statement made by a witness for the prosecution was related by one of his students to the effect that, I believe in evolution, but I don't believe in this monkey business. John Scopes was guilty of being a bad teacher. And true to form, science came roaring back about 20 years later at a place called, ironically enough, Trinity. And a group of scientists demonstrated that questions of the creation of the universe aside, they had definitely figured out how to unmake it. And as a further nod to humorous irony, I'll point out that a mushroom cloud does kind of look like a big exclamation point. And while the use of the atomic power and the fear of its horrible consequences would set the balancing bar of world power from that point on, another great thing happened with language. A genre known as science fiction was created. Now, in truth, science fiction was born at the advent of the industrial age with works such as authors of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. But just as the splitting of the atom represented a quantum leap in human technology, the atomic age saw the genre become more mainstream. Now, a couple of definitions are in order here. Firstly, in my opinion, true science fiction attempts to explain scientific advances not in terms of what they can do for us, but what they tell us about ourselves or what we know already. In genuine, real science fiction, we have the science, the technological advance, and the fiction, how this technology has an effect on people. Now, if you've ever heard the expression, I liked the book better than the movie, I wish I could do a better job of explaining that. But when you read a book, your subconscious mind allows you to fill in the blanks and identify yourself with the characters and the themes within. This is a subjective experience, and different people will read a book in different ways. With a movie, a director robs you of that magic and substitutes his own fantastic vision for what the book means. Your individual opinion is not part of that process. And a great example of this is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, a classical and meaningful piece of science fiction writing, which was pimped out as a script for one of the most horrible movies I've ever seen. Now, we can dispense with this movie quickly. It was an action and adventure flick, no different from Rambo or James Bond. You had a hero, a heroine, a conflict, and a resolution of the conflict through the very latest in special effects. You walked out of the theater with a stomach full of popcorn, the beginnings of an epileptic seizure induced by all the flashing lights, and no better of an understanding of the world around you than when you went in. Not all science fiction movies are bad. Forbidden Planet was a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest in the space age, and the RoboCop series actually had some comical interplay between the technical and emotional sides of our existence, but nothing on the level of Isaac Asimov, which brings us to the book. The original text describes a future where robots are mass-produced for integration into human society. To delineate the relationship between machines and men, three simple laws of robotics are established as follows. Firstly, a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Second, a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. Finally, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. From here, the author moves into several chapters in which each of these laws is tested in controlled scientific situations. Sometimes the rules are modified or corollaries to the rules are created. But things get really interesting when we move into a chapter that's subtitled Liar. In the opening of the story, the scientists in charge of robot production discover that somehow a psychic robot, RB-34, has come off the assembly line. The existence of this robot and its abilities are kept secret while the scientists attempt to discover how those abilities were created. And to this end, one of the book's protagonists, Susan Calvin, who is a robot psychologist, is sent in to interview RB-34 under the guise of giving him some technical manuals to study. With its extraordinary abilities, the robot discerns that the books are a ruse and states, "It's the same with these books, you know, as with the others. They just don't interest me. There's nothing to your textbooks. Your science is just a mass of collected data plastered together by makeshift theory, and all so incredibly simple that it's hardly worth bothering about. It's your fiction that interests me, your study of human motives and emotions. I see into minds, you know, and you have no idea how complicated they are." And on that basis, and in order not to violate the dictates of the first law of robotics, RB-34, who has now been given the more human name of Herbie, begins telling the scientists things that they want to hear based on what he senses in their minds. Susan Calvin, who has led a puritanical of a life as her namesake up to this point, is told that one of her coworkers is madly in love with her. Another more ambitious scientist is told that he will be the next director of the company as soon as he figures out how Herbie has developed his psychic powers. Herbie knows exactly how he's developed his telekinetic abilities, but he feigns ignorance so as not to damage that man's ego. Ultimately, the robot's habit of telling people what they want to hear, lies which were given with the best of intentions, is revealed along with a paradox in the rules of logic he has been programmed with and as stated by Dr. Calvin. Referring to the lies, you can't tell them because that would hurt, and you mustn't hurt. But if you don't tell them, you hurt. So you must tell them. And if you do so, you will be hurt and you mustn't. So you can't tell them. But if you don't, you hurt, so you must. At this point, and caught between the ironclad and logical rules of robotics and the vain and shifting desires of the human heart, Herbie's brain explodes. The cold science of his brain's construction cannot accept the pain of his metal heart breaking, and there's no algorithm to solve his dilemma. The conflict between technology and humanity that Asimov presents the reader with is developed further by Philip Dick in Blade Runner, and more hauntingly so in that film's sequel. Other writers have more directly addressed present-day societal problems with tales of the not-too-distant future. One of the first books I ever read cover to cover, which was Kurt Vonnegut's Welcome to the Monkey House, featured stories about overpopulation, human sexuality, and the nature of human equality in settings where these concepts were allowed to run amok. And finally, religious dogma is confronted in stories like The Fire Balloons by Ray Bradbury, where a group of priests travel to Mars to absolve the native Martians of their sins. Or again, in The Star by Arthur C. Clarke, where a Jesuit astrophysicist discovers that the Star of Bethlehem wiped out an advanced civilization while signifying the birth of Christ. Traditional religion provides us with many paradoxes and leaves us with some key questions unanswered. And we have over 2 millenniums worth of wars to prove that. But rather than blame God for giving us an incomplete owner's manual for the universe, I think we should praise him for giving us brains to fill in the blanks with. Yes, technological advances like Saran wrap, cheese and aerosol cans are convenient, but beyond that, we've been given the gift of questioning. Science and the fictions we base on it give us a new perspective for examining our existence. And when facing a God who knows the last digit of pi, a God who put the capital I in the infinite, we may be able to accept that the process of asking questions is the true purpose of our existence. Science alone may not explain the existence or nature of the divine, but science fiction provides a pretty clear yardstick for measuring humanity. And I would close by submitting to you that we need to know the human before we know the God that we worship. Again, thank you.